Hello, everybody. My name is Leni Wallenberg. I'm from the Alliance of Bioversity and CIAT. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this seminar today about using digital tools to support climate and agroecological transitions at scale. I'm also the leader of the Agroecological Transitions project on inclusive digital tools. So our purpose today is to really understand how we can use digital tools to support transitions in agroecology and to do so at scale. What we're trying to do is to bring together the digital tool community together with the agroecology community, especially those involved with the TPP, and to ask a couple of questions related to how digital tools can better address the human aspects of agroecology. So thinking about farmer agency, farmer co-creation of practices, relevance to farmers' contexts, farmers' privacy and data rights. And so I'm very excited that we have a series of presentations that will address that today. And they will review specifically co-creation of farmer practices, integrated digital information systems, incentives for agroecological transitions, agroecology indicators, and principles for social inclusion with digital tools. Our agenda for today will involve two panels, actually two sets of speakers and then a panel. So the first set of speakers will share with you the results of our research on the ground. The second set of speakers will talk about more general issues related to metrics and principles. And then the panel will bring together one person from the agroecology community, Oliver Oliveros, and one person from the digital community, Alicia Miller, who will then share with you their thoughts about what is most promising and what will it take to make that happen. And then we'll go into plenary and we'll have an opportunity for everyone to share their thoughts about priorities for a digital agroecological transition. And we'll close with comments from Christophe Larose, our donor from INTPA in the European Commission. I'd just like to let you know that there are a set of house rules that will be put in the chat, and to note that the chat is off for our attendees. Please put any questions that you have in the Q&A box specifically, and direct them to the speaker so that we can provide an answer for you, ideally in the Q&A box, because our opportunities for questions and answers will be quite short. And so with that, I'd like to hand over to Violaine Lorenz, our first speaker from Solidaridad. Thank you.
Thank you, Leni. Hello, everyone. So I work for Solidaridad Latin America, which is an international nonprofit that has been investing in the development and implementation of digital tools for over a decade, with a strong emphasis on digital interaction with smallholder farmers. And as part of the Transitions project, we co-created with farmers and extension staff a digital innovation called Solis that disrupts the traditional top-down technical assistance model and uses the mechanism of social media to scale agroecological practices. Next, please. So this project is taking place in the Brazilian Amazon, in the state of Pará, which is a major cattle hub. Despite significant efforts to cut emissions, Pará still faces high deforestation rates due to cattle and soy expansion mainly. And in family farming, the combination of low livelihoods and the lack of quality technical assistance hinders productivity and leads to increased pressure on the environment. So we work along the Trans-Amazonian Highway with more than 1,200 families who produce cocoa and livestock as their main crops. Most of these farmers have a stable on-farm internet connection through satellite technology mainly, and all of them have a smartphone and use WhatsApp. And social media platforms such as YouTube, TikTok, and especially Quai are widely used by youth. So now a few words about the farming system. In the project location, average size of the farms is 62 hectares. More than half of the land area is dedicated to pasture and approximately 3 hectares to cocoa. In terms of production practices, the prevailing model is extensive livestock production. So key practices for initiating an agroecological transition include intensification of pasture through rotational grazing and use of pasture grasses adapted to the local conditions to enhance productivity during the fattening phase. So in this context, we identify the opportunity to leverage digital resources to enhance farmers' agency and facilitate the co-creation of knowledge for scaling agroecological practices. Our innovation lies primarily in the process and in the direct participation of farmers at every stage. So the first step was to conduct an intensive round of participatory workshops with farmer and extension staff to identify the key challenges in adopting sustainable practices. And then we worked with farmers to develop practical solutions around digital resources. And the idea that emerged was to create a digital platform to produce locally relevant content and enhance information exchange among farmers and between farmers, technical staff, and experts. And based on this, we developed a mobile interface called Solis, which we tested with farmers to gather feedback before launching the 1.0 version. So this is what you can see on the screen. So as one of the premises of the project was to build on existing resources, we used an existing app as our starting point. This app is called Extension Solution. It was designed for extension staff, and it generates individual action plan to guide technical assistance. With Solis, we created a functionality that allows farmers to access and update their action plans and request validation or technical guidance to the extensionist at any moment without the limitations of physical distance. But the most innovative part of Solis is the second functionality, which replicates the look and feel of a social network, but works as a digital learning community. So users can create and share their own videos and access information on locally relevant practices. And we already see that this channel is transforming access to technical guidance by enhancing both reach and experience. For instance, demonstrative units, farmers typically visit a demo unit only once or twice to observe progress, but with Solis, they can track results in real time and ask questions directly to farmers. So this digital approach makes the experience more interactive and foster both online interaction and in-person cooperation. And this combination is the cornerstone of our strategy to scale up through digital resources while nurturing the human element of agroecology. So actually what we call Solis is not just an app, it's really a social innovation that integrates digital resources and enabling mechanism for continuous co-creation and engagement. So the first mechanism is a combination of in-person field days involving farmers and experts with the production of videos by farmers. So during field days, farmers and experts identify agroecological practices for the local systems, and this is a great way to balance scientific expertise with farmer knowledge. And then the farmers record videos sharing their experiences and demonstrating how they adopted these practices. The second mechanism focuses on building local leadership to bring the digital learning community to life. So we trained 5 young farmers and extensionists to become ambassadors for the agroecological transition and influencers on Solis. And their role is to engage peers and family, create and share content on Solis, and support other farmers in producing and sharing their own video. And third, to scale beyond the community level, we rely on the engagement of local action partners who work with farmers and look at cost-effective solutions to disseminate sustainable practices. And we are considering integrating Solis with existing digital tools from this organization. So you can go next. And this is precisely where we stand. So in October, next month, we will organize workshops with local stakeholders in Pará and Mato Grosso, including secretariats of environment and agriculture, farm organizations, NGOs, private sector actors, academia, etc. We will introduce Solis and offer it as the digital hub to disseminate technical assistance, increase reach, and shift from a traditional bottom-up approach to a more interactive two-way communication with farmers. So based on first conversation, we are quite confident about this outreach strategy, but we have identified some challenges for which we do not yet have complete solutions. So you can go next, and that will be my next slide. So first is content curation. Right now, our team ensures that videos are aligned with the agroecological curriculum, but as we scale up, handling content curation can't be managed manually. So we are looking at using AI, machine learning to help us grow. But the question is, are these technologies compatible with the principles of agroecology? The second challenge is how to attract and retain new content creators. and curators, because as we scale, we need to find innovative ways to bring in fresh voices and keep them engaged, possibly by partnering with organizations. And this brings us to the third challenge, which is the business model. So Solis is and really remain free for farmers. Currently, our revenue model involves integrating Solis as an add-on to extension solution, which operates on a fee-for-service basis. However, Solis might outgrow this model, and our ambassadors are asking if Solis will integrate a monetization program similar to those on YouTube, where influencers are paid based on video performance. So the question is whether we can incorporate such a monetization model and what alternative revenue streams we can explore with partner organizations. So these are complex but exciting challenges, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas on how we can address them. Thank you very much for your attention, and I am now passing it over to Katie Nelson from IRRI.
Thank you very much, Violaine. I will go ahead and share, or I think that you need to stop sharing. Yeah. I still can't share. There we go. Okay. So thanks very much, Violaine. While I'm uploading my slides here, I will go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Katie Nelson, and I'm with the International Rice Research Institute based in Hanoi, Vietnam. I'm a climate change scientist and the lead of the regional lead of our digital tools project. So today I'll be presenting our work around what we're calling vertically integrated digital performance assessment tools for agroecological transitions for rice. So just to give a little bit of a background around agroecology initiatives in Vietnam, and then also what the status of rice production in Vietnam is. There are multiple policies within Vietnam that focus on their green growth, and these include the National Action Plan on Transparent and Accountable and Sustainable Food Systems, as well as Vietnam's Sustainable Agricultural Transformation Initiative, which focused heavily on rice. This project has a second phase now that's working towards 1 million hectares of high-value, sustainable, and low-emission rice. Typical rice practices, so conventional rice farming in Vietnam is characterized by having high seed rates and excessive use of inputs such as fertilizers, pesticides, and inefficient water use, as well as high post-harvest losses. And these can be both from sun drying or from logistics being not coordinated on time. This also includes losses of straw. So what's important to note here is balancing political goals of sustainable transitions as well as emission reduction, which can involve weighing the trade-offs and co-creating alternative solutions that serve both goals. Rice is a challenging crop in general because it is a low-value staple crop that's mainly used for domestic consumption. Although Vietnam is the third largest exporter for rice, the majority of rice grown in Vietnam is consumed in Vietnam. Further, where Vietnam lies in terms of the transition towards agroecology is going to be somewhere around level 1 and level 2, and this is around increasing efficiency of inputs and substituting alternatives. One additional point is that there are high levels of connectivity in Vietnam, so many big farmers have access to internet and use of smartphones, although very few farmers, around 3% of farmers and extension agents, are using farming apps to support their rice production. We evaluated a program that has been promoted under this VNSAT project that's called 1 Must Do and 5 Reductions. It's a sustainability package with co-benefits of emission reduction and reducing costs for farmers. This again focuses on using certified seed and then reducing seed rate, fertilizer, pesticide, water, and post-harvest losses, while also increasing the income of farmers. And as you can see here, there are points that meet all of the agroecological principles, but they might not individually meet all of those principles. So one of the ways that we looked at assessing what were the farmers' needs are how can we provide a digital tool that can support farmers, although they may not be using smartphones. And so we looked into a locally adapted automated water level sensor, which provides SMS messages daily for farmers on their field water levels. So this is directly targeted at and towards with farmers. Then we also have an app, smartphone app, which is called FarmMore. This is meant for intermediaries. It's a benchmark performance assessment app for the 1 Must Do 5 reductions package. And this also integrates a greenhouse gas calculator together to be able to provide results on the benchmarks for all of those points. Additionally, RICEmore, which is a government statistical reporting platform that we have been working on digitizing as part of a separate project. We have integrated these tools so that the FarmMore, which is the intermediary-facing app and field-level information collecting app, can also link together with this larger system of reporting from the government. Just a few points on water intel. I did mention this was locally developed. It's solar powered and it's an automated sensor that sends SMSs daily to farmer mobile phones. The benefits of water control in rice is that being able to control the water accurately means you can improve nutrient uptake and efficiency. It reduces runoff. It can control aquatic and dryland weeds. And it also optimizes water management, which reduces methane emissions by, or it can reduce methane emissions by up to 50%. Further, in terms of landscape, there's more fresh water that can be available downstream where salinization may be an issue. This tool is farmer-centric and inclusive because farmers can use it without the need for a smartphone or a high level of digital literacy, which is important for rice farmers that are generally a bit older. Farmers do have several fields also in different locations that can be several kilometers apart and several kilometers from their home, so this can reduce their time and effort. The smartphone app, FarmMore, is a fit-for-purpose smartphone app that's co-developed with users through an iterative design and testing process. As I mentioned before, it's intended for use by intermediary field agents to be used together with farmers so that they can co-create on the solutions and discuss what kind of alternative substitutions can be met. And then this also allows other farmers to connect and provide information with each other.
I'm afraid your time is
up, so just, yeah, you can wrap up.
Okay. It then instantly returns the benchmark performance that's related to these factors. So I think I just have 2 more slides. Just one important point is that the output is an instant response, and it does provide this easy to read traffic light type of range for the benchmark performance indicators. It enables traceability and certification, and then the next phase is to link to more tailored interventions and advisories. Just quickly, I'll focus only on a few of the promising scaling and then some of the challenging aspects. So RICEmore has already been scaled out to 13 provinces, and the FarmMore app, it will be scaled into 12 provinces that can reach up to 1.5 million farmers cultivating 4 million hectares of rice. So I'll go ahead and stop there since I'm out of time. Thank you. And I'll hand off next to Francisco Hidalgo of the Alliance of Bioversity and CIAT. Stop sharing now.
So thank you very much. And hello, everybody. I am part of CIAT. I'm working in the project, the private sector incentives for climate change resilience and environmental sustainability. And today I will use the next 6 minutes to explain why we think that leveraging digital traceability for agroecological transitions is a process underpinned by connection, co-creation, and responsibility. So, and I will going to do it through an example, digital traceability that we co-developed for the cocoa value chain. This system has 3 different elements: the actors, who are farmers, technicians, manufacturers, and the consumers. The other element is the technology, which is a system for collecting farm data on the field, linked to blockchain technology, and the information, which is the agroecological metrics in the cocoa value chain, geographical information, and end-to-end traceability. And blockchain is the platform that links together these 3 different elements in a system that shares information on agroecology in a safe, transparent, and efficient way. So this brings the connection element. Then the connection actually didn't start with the use of the system, but started before in the design. And for this, we were able to bring together a cooperative, cocoa cooperative in Peru, a cocoa manufacturer, and a developer of blockchain technology for food systems. And we acted as facilitators of the process and integrating the different actors. And we conducted a process of design and testing on field and redesign with direct participation of the cooperative. And important here was to identify the key incentives of participation for these different actors. In the case of the cooperative, it was for them important to have a digital system to collect data in a more efficient and reliable way. And for the manufacturer, it was very important to have a system to collect information to comply with the European Union regulation on deforestation. And so this is the co-creation element. And we agreed, all the actors, in a set of different agroecological metrics to be collected the information with this system. Important here is to highlight that we wanted to be very holistic in our measurements. So we covered the different 13 agroecology principles that were developed by the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition in 2019. So all these principles are covered by the metrics. And also we wanted to use metrics that simultaneously respond to different principles, but also to have a compact set of metrics, so to reduce the effort of collection of information on the field. So at the end, we end with this list of 19 metrics. And very important is that most of them, the cooperative was already collecting information for them, but in paper-based processes. So it was necessary only to translate this to a digital data collection system, to adapt some of the metrics, and just to include additional 5 metrics to the system. Just the takeaways of this process is that everybody needs information, and blockchain can be a platform to connect actors around agroecology through an efficient, transparent, and safe information sharing. Information needs to be actionable, and co-creation is an effective way to create contextualized systems that are able to provide solutions for the different actors. It's important to identify key participation incentives for each actor and design the systems to respond to these demands. Today, what more than a tool, I wanted to present an approach, and it was a co-creation of traceability system that can be replicated in other agricultural value chains. Additionally, blockchain is a platform that can grow to connect more actors and create information ecosystems. Enabling information sharing is the key element of a traceability digital system. And this calls strongly for implementing ethical and responsible data management measurements. This involves the protection of personal data, disclosing the use of data with all actors, data sovereignty, and also reciprocal information exchange. And with that, I want to come back to the statement to say that we consider that leveraging digital traceability for agroecology is a process underpinned by connection, co-creation, and responsibility. Thank you very much. And with that, I want to give the floor to our facilitator, Sandhya.
Thanks, Francisco, and thank you to all the presenters. Maybe quickly I can introduce myself. My name is Sandhya Kumar. I'm a social systems scientist at CIFOR-ICRAF and the scientific coordinator for the Transformative Partnership Platform on Agroecology. And it's a great pleasure to be facilitating these sessions. We have exactly 3 minutes, so I have a question for each of you, and you have only 1 minute. So to Violaine, there's a question about the generational divide in how people approached and related to the app. So what was the experience when developing this between, say, youngsters and maybe older generations within the communities involved?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. So first of all, when it comes, I think there was a question also around digital infrastructure. So in this specific region of rural Brazil, access to internet is not a challenge anymore due to this expansional development of satellite internet, first of all. Now, when it comes to digital literacy, this is indeed a critical challenge, and we are really working on that as one of our enabling mechanisms for this. So we have identified young farmers and sons and daughters of farmers as the influencers, and they are really looking at information on the internet to help their parents and their community to adopt better practices. So this is why in our strategy, we are focusing on training these young people to produce the videos and support them. But we have identified the need to work also on broader digital literacy to support older farmers in the use of the app. Also recognizing that some of them won't use Solus, which is why we have to always combine in-person engagement with digital activities.
Thank you, Violaine. Katie, 1 minute. So how do you envision that Rice More and Farm More will support the transition to full agroecological practices in Vietnam in the long term?
Thanks for the question. So it's actually very interesting. I'm sitting in on a huge regional and actually global project workshop at the moment, and there's a lot of discussion around nature-based solutions and more holistic sustainability approaches. So there's a lot of momentum that's going in that direction. And we can see that as these projects develop, it moves things along that spectrum. And so we're already linked in with multiple of these larger ongoing projects. The Ricemore and Farmmore system has been transferred to the Ministry of Agriculture, so it can be sustained over the longer term and can be built on. So that's the idea, is to get the information or app into farmers' hands in a simple way in the beginning, and then to extend and expand upon that over time. And so we definitely plan to continue the engagement. And with it being a MARD product, then I'm very certain that it will also continue to develop under their role.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. And last question and last minute, Francisco. So there are questions on blockchain. So how do you imagine that blockchain can be rolled out, particularly among smallholder farmers who may have limited literacy, digital literacy, and so forth?
Yeah, thank you, Sandhya. Well, I think one thing that can be done is to connect blockchain with more familiar technologies for smallholder farmers, and we tried to do that through the system to collect farm data based on a smartphone application. And for example, in Peru, these technologies of smartphones and mobile phones are more spread. And then this flow of information can be linked to blockchain to make it more accessible for them.
Great. Thank you so much. And with that, we move on to our next sort of session and two speakers. And let me invite Mary Crossland, a colleague here at CIFOR-ICRAF, to share with us about metrics for holistic assessments in digital tools. Mary.
Great. Thanks, Sandhya. So I'm Mary Crossland from CIFOR-ICRAF, and I'll be talking about some insights from the Transitions Metrics project, focusing on metrics for holistic assessment in digital tools. So a key challenge to scaling agroecology with digital tools is being able to provide different actors with ways of measuring performance in a holistic way, but in a way that allows for a fair comparison with alternatives. And given the complexity of food and agricultural systems, measuring them isn't easy, and it's common practice to focus on measures that focus on a narrow set of metrics, focusing on productivity and economic productivity. So by developing holistic digital assessment tools that account for the multiple impacts, we can create that level playing field for agroecological approaches and enable those transitions. To explore what assessment tools are available, what dimensions they cover, we've done a large systematic review. We reviewed, I think, over 200 holistic assessments. And here you can see the distribution of assessments by their year of publication, showing that there's this increasing number of assessments each year. And digital tools have, a big potential to increase the usability of holistic assessments. But we only found 15 assessments that had associated platforms and digital tools. Sorry. So, and these digital tools vary in their format. So they range from simple spreadsheet-based tools to more interactive online platforms for data entry, but also the visualization of results. These are just two examples from those that we found. So to understand the dimensions that these assessments are addressing, we mapped them to the Sustainable Development Goals. So here on the left, you can see that goals more related to food production are more frequently addressed compared to those more socially related goals such as governance, equity, gender equality. And this is very similar to the work done by the Alliance and Burns et al., who specifically reviewed digital tools in relation to the principles of agroecology, which you can see here on the right. So looking at the types of metrics that that digital tools are using, we see that many of the metrics depend on these kind of value judgments made by those conducting the assessment. So for example, whether a farm has a high number of trees is quite subjective and likely to vary from place to place. So this limits the reproducibility and comparability of these assessments. But we also see they do combine these kind of practice-based and performance-based metrics. And this likely reflects that trade-off between how comprehensive and complex an assessment tool is with how quick and easy it is to use as well. So when working with agri-food systems, we need to consider those interactions, those synergies and trade-offs between the different components. Most of the assessments that we looked at tend to use these kind of composite indices and radar diagrams for displaying results. And these are very simple and attractive, but they do tend to hide the complexity in those interactions between the different dimensions. In terms of the guidance that these tools and approaches provide, they often focus on how to kind of generate the data, but less so on the actual interpretation. So how do we interpret these results? What are the recommendations that we can take away from them? And so this is a key barrier in terms of the uptake and ability of digital tools to really influence decisions and actions. So based on these kind of insights from the review, we've identified these kind of 5 actions in relation to holistic metrics for digital tools. And so first one is develop guidance for selecting the right tool. So there are different tools out there. You need to be aware of what the pros and cons are, which ones are going to work for you. There's often not one approach that's going to work for everyone everywhere. And this includes that consideration of trade-offs. How comprehensive do you need the tool to be? Who are your users? How easy and quick is it to use? Next, develop tools that can capture social aspects, such as governance, culture, and equity. So potentially developing metrics that can really capture these aspects, and also within digital tools. Analyze and visualize data in ways that reveals that complexity and trade-offs. And this is often to do with the analysis and visualization. So digital tools that can maybe automate and help people with these types of analyses could be very useful. And lastly, the need to consider that in-person interaction that we've already heard about, such as combining extension alongside digital tools, and that need to really move towards guidance and generating recommendations. Great. So thank you very much for your time. And now over to Kyle.
Thank you very much, Mary. I am Kyle Dittmer. I'm from the Alliance of Bioversity and CIAT. And today I'm going to be presenting on the principles that we have developed for socially inclusive digital tools for smallholder farmers. We have undergone this work as there is currently a fundamental challenge in digital tools and smallholder inclusion broadly. We know that digital tools can be a highly powerful means to scale up best practices and promote agroecological transitions. However, smallholder farmers often do not have the means or the influence to develop tools that are going to reflect their priorities or their context. And so this begs the question of how can we improve smallholder autonomy in the scaling of best practices via the use of digital tools. This brings us into our principles, with the ultimate aim here to be to support digital developers and managers in using digital tools with farmers to better enable their inclusion and co-design of farming practices. These principles were developed through a review of over 30 different resources broadly related to inclusive digital development. And recently, a version 2 was published based off of lessons learned from our 2 regional case studies in Vietnam and Brazil, which we heard about from Violin and Katie. So there are 6 high-level principles, and each of these principles are accompanied by 3 to 6 sub-principles. And these are to engage diverse farmers, enhance access, co-create digitally enabled farming practices with farmers, use technology appropriately, use farmers' data responsibly, and to develop tools responsibly. When we did this review, we wanted to better understand how our principles were mapping to existence guidance or standards on inclusive digital development. And through that review, we did find that social inclusion principles were somewhat more common, as we could see from principle 1 of engaging diverse users. However, topics important to agroecology were often lacking. And so, for example, principle 3 of co-creating farming practices with farmers, features could be related to participatory communication modalities, and those aspects were lacking. And we could see also from this chart, with purple being guidance and green being standards, that standards on accountability are less frequently addressed. And this could be related to evaluative criteria on the degree of goodness or even benchmarks. These principles are not just theoretical, but they are being operationalized already. And so I just wanted to highlight a few different ways in which these principles are being operationalized. The IRRI app is an excellent tool in low literacy communities based off of their use of iconography. So that ensures usability of tools by diverse users. Similarly with the digital green community videos, also great in low literacy communities, but also through these videos, it's a familiar source of information by familiar people and familiar places and contexts. The GeoFarmer app has features in the tool that users can add questions, they can add ideas, and even add issues, whether that's related to the content itself or the interface. And so that's that ability in order to facilitate information flows amongst farmers and between farmers and advisors, and even in this case with tool developers. Prioritizing simple solutions. Not everything needs to be the next best thing and have all the bells and whistles. And so the Amplio Talking Book, another great example for low literacy communities where audio formatting and content being delivered in that fashion is going to be more accessible to many users. The FarmStack tool has explicit data privacy, security, and safety measures where users are able to extract their data, share their data directly for additional learning opportunities, as well as be able to decide how their data is going to be controlled and used. And the final example is the Bushel tool, just an example of transparent and accountable governance structures. So this tool has a web page dedicated to different documents on privacy, compliance, and security measures on how users' data is going to be secured and used, all posted in a transparent Bushel Trust Center webpage. Despite those examples, there is still much more work to do. And so when we were trying to identify examples of tools that address these principles, some principles were more challenging to address than others. And also notable that there is a challenge in holistic implementation of all these principles. So some tools are incorporating many of these principles and sub-principles, but a comprehensive approach is still remaining rare. And that could be due to complexity or some principles being more costly to implement. And so when we think about the future direction and how we want to move into developing socially inclusive digital tools for and by smallholders, it's going to be a coordinated effort on multiple fronts. And so for tool developers, we are recommending to involve smallholders from the get-go and tailor the content based off of their specific needs and priorities, as well as collaborate with farmer support organizations as we see them as a bridge between tool developers and smallholders themselves. And so these support organizations can advocate for vulnerable farmers, promote digital literacy through training, as well as negotiate better pricing for more accessible technologies. Smallholders themselves can be proactively adopting and experimenting with different digital tools to better understand what their priorities are and what works for them and what does not work, and using these principles to negotiate their rights in seeking relevant tools. And lastly, for policymakers to invest in training and education programs, implementing regulations for data protection, such as the EU GDPR, the Good General Data Protection Regulation, as well as providing incentives to overcome the cost barrier to enhance access. And I would like to thank you all, and I will pass it back to Sandhya, our facilitator.
Thanks, Kyle, and thank you, Mary. So Mary, a question from the chat from Soliver. So with regard to the tools you came across from your meta-analysis, How do you think they address long-term monitoring, especially considering how agroecological social responses may take a while to respond to a given intervention? And the idea that some forms of funding grants don't have funds allocated to monitoring after the grant cycle ends. So how do these tools and also the framework presented address long-term monitoring?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. From our reviews, something that we did see is that often these assessments that we were looking at on the tools had been this kind of snapshot, so a one-off assessment. Although a lot of these tools could be used for these more kind of longitudinal kind of multiple assessments to look at change over time, a lot of the reports and data that we looked at didn't show that they had really been used in that way. So that's certainly something that's lacking. I think that probably links to your next point around the cost. Collecting data does cost money. So I think that's a barrier that really needs to be addressed, is how can we actually fund these kind of long-term assessments? Yeah, excellent question. Hope that answered it.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. And maybe Kyle, Aaron is asking, how will you engage and convince a diverse group of farmers with several farming practices on their own and personal preferences, as well as prejudice towards technology to use digital technology, whether it be high tech or low tech?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So I would say it's, in order to convince, it's going to be a coordinated effort on, engaging community, using the power of community in order to show that there can be benefits in using these different tools. So if we can demonstrate through on-farm trials, for example, through demo plots, and have farmers come in and see that these tools are promoting this different form of information and enhancing yield or enhancing different outcomes, then it's going to be observation, I think, and the power of engagement and power of communication amongst farmers and other stakeholders. It's
Great.
a challenging feat.
Sure. Thank you, Kyle. And maybe also a reminder to panelists, there are other questions, so feel free to take a shot at them if you have a moment and go through that. And with that, we will proceed to our panel, and I'd like to invite Oliver Oliveros, who is the coordinator for the Agroecology Coalition, and Alicia Miller, who is Chief Strategy Officer for Digital Green. And basically, just to get things, going, based on the experiences you've heard, Alicia and Oliver, what do you think are some of the 2-3 highlights or points that seem most promising, and what will it take to actually take them into action and to implement them at a larger scale? So, Alicia, Oliver, who would like to go first?
Well, I can start. Go ahead.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks very much, Sandhya, and I'm glad that we're bringing the different communities together in this conversation. What I'm hearing from today is that the use of digital technologies, if properly oriented, could open diverse opportunities to meet the challenges of climate and agroecological transition, including bridging geographic distances, better management of resources. I think about, the precision technology, sensors, resulting in efficient use of input, making informed decisions. We've heard about actors making informed decisions based on available data, using existing apps, drone satellite images, etc., fostering transparency in supply chains and markets. Think about logistics and traceability technologies, and winning back young people into agriculture in this age where no one wants to go back into farming. So development of innovation systems is crucial to enable the scaling, and the scale-up innovation driven by the digital tool is very wide and has potential to transform agriculture. However, there are potential risks associated with digitalization opposing or not compatible with agroecological principles, especially if the emphasis is really about technology development and deployment per se. And I think these risks needs to be addressed and factored into designing and deploying digitalization efforts. One, social inclusion is a risk. The lack of knowledge, capital, and internet connectivity further marginalize actors who are already in the margins of the current system. Digital divide is real. Two, compatibility of data. Data are often not standardized, and we're not even talking about collecting data, which is very costly. Data are often not standardized and often fragmented across different international agencies, donors, government sectors, projects. public and private institutions, and they may be collected or managed using different protocols, making them difficult to use. Third is trust issues with data ownership and privacy. Data collection can be extractive, and therefore the notion that data is not solely confined within the boundaries of corporate control is there. And it has been around long before the era of digitalization. If you think about indigenous peoples, peasants, and other small scales and food producers who have a variety of methods to generate, collect, store, and use data that are often not considered in the standard data collection system that in decision making. So it is important to recognize the significance of these data for agroecological and climate transition and decision-making processes across different levels, and to support the effective, inclusive, and meaningful participation of those who generate data. So let's think about, sort of like an access and benefit sharing so far as data and digitalization is concerned. Fourth is power imbalances among actors of food systems due to the entry of, let's face it, new actors such as big tech companies into the system. So tech innovation can further increase inequality. So it is really important to defend the rights of citizens and avoid concentration in tech giants. And legislations about this and the use of artificial intelligence need to be put up, implemented and monitored in ways that are safe, transparent, and let me add also non-discriminatory. The fifth point, I think, is about quality in terms of agricultural practices or climate mitigation approaches. There's a need to look at the content and how do you verify what's posted and shared are indeed the right approaches to address climate mitigation, adaptation, and agroecological approaches. How do we ensure quality and avoid having unverified, untested practices, and also how to go beyond viral approaches to doing things and make sure that there is a steady flow of relevant, pertinent content. And the sixth is Mary, the point that was raised by Mary and Kyle as well, in terms of, in digitalization, there's a tendency to fall into the trap of, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Because, there's always that tendency to look at tools and metrics that only focus on the quantitative elements like incomes and yields, and less so on process, social dimensions such as governance, equity, which are central to agroecological transformation. So in other words, the digitalization of agriculture should not be focused solely on improving productivity, as it may only exacerbate the existing divide that is already prevalent in existing system. And there will always be technical solutions. There will always be that. But to make high-tech work, I think we need to think low-tech, back to the basics. So there has to be a discussion on the management, access, and ownership of data. It has to be discussed, clarified, and agreed upon by the concerned parties. And for this to happen, you have the elements and principles of agroecology that will help guide the framing, the conversation into that process. So with that, let me hand over to you, Alicia, for what's your take on the conversation.
Thanks, Oliver. Yeah, glad to be able to comment on this. I think you asked us about kind of big opportunities and exciting things and then challenges. So I bucketed them into two things. So one is, we heard a lot about the co-creation of content at scale, the possibilities of how co-creation can go to a different level, how we can take the principles and the practices that have been effective and empowering and have shared agroecological practices, but then amplify that with technology. So I think we heard a lot about that in the case of Solidaridad. One of the challenges that was highlighted there that I wanted to punctuate here is this idea of compensation or rewarding people for the process of doing that co-creation work. I think this is actually a really interesting challenge to focus on, especially as we're going into the era of AI, where a lot of content is just being automatically generated. What is the value of human content generation? What's the value of hyperlocal practices that are unknown in many cases to these knowledge models that are being created? And how can those creators be rewarded as the practices need to keep evolving also? I think that's a really interesting challenge, but also frankly a creative challenge, and one that could also open up new opportunities for some of those creators if we can figure out how to do it right. There's a question about AI asked in the chat, and I wanted to respond to it here because I think, again, AI was mentioned as a possibility for easing the curation burden, again, in the Brazil example, but it came up other places as well. I think it does have a real opportunity for addressing the burden of curation. It also has an opportunity, Oliver, of taking unstructured data like you were talking about data not being interoperable. AI can really help us to make data much more interoperable and take unstructured data and make it structured, which is work that would have taken humans a lot more effort and time. But then the question was raised about, is that really consistent with agroecological principles given the energy cost? And I wanted to just address this. I think we're in the early days of understanding kind of the energy costs of AI, but it looks like it's going to be staggering as people keep using it more. But there are things that are coming up that I think hold promise. One of them is that there's a lot of interest in small language models. We're all used to the idea of large language models. There are also small language models emerging that you can, in fact, train or fine tune for specific tasks and domains. And at Digital Green, we've been talking with our partners at the CIFOR and elsewhere about whether we could, in fact, fine tune small language models for agriculture. And that's just one solution, but I think that this is a known problem. And if we can kind of keep up with what's being offered in the tech sector, we might be able to adapt it to our purposes and keep driving down the cost of energy. And frankly, not overusing it. In our stack that we've been using, there's multiple calls on AI because there's translation steps, there's kind of summarization steps. We are looking at ways to reduce the number of calls on AI to make that a much lower cost experience. And so I think that's the opportunity and the challenge in front of us. The second big bucket I wanted to call out is easing the data collection burden. So I heard from IRRI about water intel, sort of shared monitoring for ground truthing. There was discussion about how we can use groups of farmers to kind of improve the data collection at the group level. I think we have to get to the point where that data collection burden is really reduced to a more passive activity, because again, unless we're going to pay people for capturing that data, it's going to be a burden that they aren't willing or aren't able to do because of the time burdens that they have. So I'm excited about hearing about these innovations in essentially reducing the data collection burden. But then I wanted to highlight the challenge I see here, which we've talked about, which is getting consent and data management, data stewardship, especially again in the era of AI. This is something that I think we're wrestling with and interested to learn from others on as well, which is, we've tried different attempts at informed consent from prior products that we've developed. And we've even used videos and kind of some easier to understand approaches, and found that in the moment, it seemed people understood what the data was and how it would be used and how they could kind of change consent. But then actually, if you do you revisit it a few months later, it seems people don't actually necessarily retain what they agreed to. So I think this idea of informed consent is a challenging one. I also, from our experience, we found that people often don't actually want to deal with managing their own data. So we think that people want to manage and steward their data, but actually the burden of stewardship is not necessarily attractive to everyone. So finding out what's an ethical way to support people in managing and stewarding data, recognizing the challenges of actually getting informed consent, and also what people want to do with their data, how much do they want to be involved. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is, I think as we think about technology, and potential for driving inequity, I've mentioned Digital Green is using AI in a tool that we have called Farmer Chat, which people can look up. And so I'm spending a lot more time with the AI community. And one of the things that is interesting to me is I think that there's a new form of inequity that could very well arise from just access to AI or not having access to AI. Having the ability to access AI is shown to really reduce time burden on people. It increases efficiency in a number of ways across their lives. It increases their access to basic information. And we have some data that I can share if it's interesting about some early work we did to kind of look at exposure to our tool. And so the sort of new have and have nots in the future might be easy access, affordable access to generalized kind of advice or not. And so that's a risk too, of like not thinking about how to make this accessible in a way that's responsible and inclusive. And one basic way that that's going to divide people is just language. There are just a lot of languages that are not supported in AI. So if my natural language model doesn't exist, I'm probably not going to be able to access it, whether it's over IVR or a mobile app or something else. So I just wanted to flag that I think that AI doesn't solve everything. It comes with its own challenges. It also is both creating opportunity for people in new ways and may leave people behind yet again if we don't figure out how to sort of marry up the principles that we're talking about here with the opportunity there. So Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Oliver and Alicia, for these insights and reflecting on all of the content that has been shared so far. And with that, I think I'll hand it over to Linny to kind of set us into the Q&A and interaction with the broader audience. Linny?
Thank you. And thank you to all of the speakers and panelists for really fantastic content-rich information. So I'd like to start. We have, I think, about 160 folks on the participant list. We'd like to start with a brief poll to find out who's in the room. And the first poll, we'll have 2 poll questions. The first is your interest primarily in agroecology or in digital tools? Your interest or your background, your work. So where do you fall? The results. I think actually we've moved to the second question, which is, there we go. Is your interest primarily agroecology or digital resources? This is the first question. And it looks like we have a surprisingly even split between agroecology and digital resources, and some people who are working on both. So that's pretty exciting. So we can have a pretty good conversation in this room. And then the second poll question is related to what digital tool improvements are needed for agroecology. And can you identify the top 3 concerns? So it looks like relevance to farmers' concerns is winning out. And farmer-friendly design and farmer co-creation. And interestingly, we see less about AI and open source code and agroecologically designed practices is climbing up there, but not quite there. So thank you, everybody. Very, very interesting. We will record this and we're going to summarize these results in a blog. So now I'd like to open up to any questions because we had very short Q&A periods. We'd like to open up to any other questions that you might have for our speakers or our panelists, and then we'll go into about 20 minutes of discussion about where are we going with all of this? What is the pathway forward? And try to identify some guidance points for the development of digital tools and agroecological transitions. So in terms of questions, there's been a consistent theme in some of the questions that we already have about accessing tools when you are in remote places. And I think we've addressed this somewhat already, but I'm just wondering if any of especially the people working in the field from the first set of presentations, have a suggestion about how are we going to work with AI if farmers can't access AI? How are we going to work with blockchain if we can't access this? How is a farmer going to access any of these tools if they don't even have a cell phone? And this relates to social inclusion. Would one of our panelists like to? Yeah, Alicia, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I can just do a quick response and also share some of our experience. So one thing I kind of mentioned before, but I just want to emphasize it, is I think in a lot of cases, the fact that it's an AI assistant may not be known to people, or it may not be a very important part of it. So an example of that is we are starting to look at using AI as a support for call center operators. So call center operators that are already answering farmer calls just need help with the efficiency of their job, being able to answer more calls more quickly. So it's a tool that can help those people triage faster to get answers. That's one example. And again, it may not need to be relayed to the farmer that there was AI being used to kind of search a body of knowledge and come up with good answers. Another one is we've been using in Ethiopia, where we have really limited kind of mobile access among the farmers we're working with. We work with the extension agents. We've been working with them on community video for a long time. We introduced a deterministic app. So it's not an AI generative app yet, but it's an app that can respond to queries about optimizing soil fertility, kind of nutrient management, among other things. And the extension agent is using it in groups. So they are helping to provide personalized recommendations faster using the tool, but it's intermediated by that extension agent. So that's a way that it's kind of surmounting kind of the access gap. And then another example is In India, we're partnering with Gramvani, which uses IVR really extensively on a whole range of different questions that people ask, including related to entitlements and other things. And we've integrated the access to agricultural information using AI into Gramvani's toolkit. So again, people are interacting with the IVR kind of interface, asking questions using voice, and it's able to draw and provide better answers using AI there. So those are 3 ways where people don't necessarily care. And by the way, people do know when we do have farmers and extension agents using the phone directly, we tell them that it's AI supported, but also even before you do that, they often say, well, this is clearly a computer. They know this is not a live person on the other end, right? So people are using common sense, I think, as they have this experience too.
Thank you, Alicia. Those were great responses. Okay, so I think there were, in terms of the poll results, well, just to double check, did anybody else from our speakers want to comment? Please just raise your hand if you want to say anything. Okay, so from our poll, the farmer-centric aspect of the digital tool development seems to really pop up. I'd love to have suggestions from our speakers and our audience about where do you think we need to go next in the next 5 years? What would be the key activities that we need to, how we can ensure that both the capacity, the implementation, the tools for scaling up farmer-centric digital resources is there. And audience, please put your thoughts either in the chat or the Q&A. Really welcome people's contributions from across the board. So what needs to happen in the next 5 years? Let's put together a roadmap. So I'm seeing one participant is saying it's about the preservation of indigenous knowledge incorporated with modern methods and procedures in more convenient and efficient farming. How are we going to do that? Because it's important to acknowledge both methods from different means of actions. So maintaining the integrity of farmers' knowledge. And another participant is saying one of the issues we face in the coming years could be technology resilience. And another participant is suggesting that because agroecology involves so much complexity, digital tools may struggle to deal with this and simplify it into actionable insights without, so how can digital tools address that complexity without oversimplification?
Yes, thanks. Well, from talking about the traceability example, I think one challenge is to provide more information back to farmers, because currently traceability systems are collecting lots of data on production and on farms and provide them in a linear flow towards the consumers. I think it would be interesting to return back the information from other steps in the value chains, back to farmers. And another thing I consider important is to even being more critical with digital technologies, because currently there is like a boost of digital technologies, like the great solution for all the problems in agri-food systems, but we need to acknowledge that this is just a tool which presents both opportunities and risks, but actually agroecological transitions need deeper transformations than just technological changes.
Thank you. Yes, an excellent point, and a theme that I think all of our speakers brought out, which is related to the need for the human intermediary and the human touch. Violaine?
Yeah, I fully agree with what Francisco just said. I think if it's about our roadmap, something that was mentioned previously by Oliver is around interoperability of data, and not only data, but also of digital resources. So I think it's our responsibility as a community to really build the protocols to make sure that we can share our innovations, our content, our metrics to be able to measure the impact of what we do. because this also requires resources, because I think that was very clear from all the presentations, digital tools cannot be seen as standalone solutions. So we really need also to combine with in-person interactions. This has a cost, so it's critical for us also to like pool resources. And one of the conditions to do that is to make our solutions interoperable, and so as to increase our scale as well.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of concrete solution that we need to be looking for. Oliver.
Yeah, another way also is to look at where do farmers normally source or generate their information and knowledge on, let's say, agroecological practices. And by that, I'm looking at the natural conduits like extension agents and ag agencies. So I think, how do we link that one? Maybe one way is to really tap on those existing mechanisms that are already there and train them. It's around capacity building of agricultural extension workers to these new and existing technologies that can be tapped. It's one way of basically spreading the technology and facilitating its wider reach. Over.
Thank you, Oliver. Could you comment on how we get those larger extension and ministry organizations, though, to take on the types of practices that we're talking about? Because they tend to be more conventional, and change in those organizations is slower than what digital tools can accomplish.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's all about, there's always that resistance to change every time you introduce something new. And if you look at probably the profile of extension agents across the world, these are people who have undergone, training and education probably 10, 20, 15 years ago. And these are not necessarily probably not the tech savvy ones. So I think there has to have some programs for retooling, and that has to be done on a regular basis with the institutions and agencies at which they depend on, like the ministries of agriculture, I could imagine. The second one is to really look at technologies that are stupidly simple, that they are really easy to be accessed and used with very clear instructions for use. So think about, how do you make a very simple WhatsApp or TikTok technology accessible to your grandparents? Something like that would allow people in the countryside to really understand the basics of things and allow them to use it without overcomplicating things. I think that's always the challenge and the trap that we fall into when we develop these types of technologies. They tend to be overly, how they call this, complex and sophisticated. So I think that if you want to make use of technology, they have to be really, really, really simple.
Yeah, thank you. So to follow up on the question of interoperability and data consent and some of the issues raised around AI and access, what kinds of policies could support this larger scale shift that we're looking for that would enable more both integration of agroecological elements, but also digital responsibility? Yeah, please, Alicia, and folks from the audience, please feel free to put your points in either the chat or the Q&A. Yeah, please go ahead, Alicia.
Just I'll make a broad point to say this is like a part of the discussion that, again, we've been starting to hear is essentially as we start training AI to serve different purposes, right? To speak different languages, to understand very specific disciplines and bodies of knowledge, including knowledge that is traditional, that should be protected, that should, where the community should get to decide how that knowledge gets used. It essentially means that we need to learn how to steward new assets. These are new types of digital assets, new public goods. And so there are discussions emerging about, like, if you think about our traditional multilateral bodies, FAO and the CGIAR and IFAD and others, we've had some governance of different kinds of public assets for a long time, and many of them, the goal is to make them as publicly available as possible. I think when it comes to AI, we know we can't train endless numbers of models in everything that we'd want. We have to kind of collectively train some of these models and then figure out how to collectively govern and steward those assets in the way that creates the most benefit for the generators of the knowledge and for the communities that are most marginalized. So what I would say is I think that there's a very active emergent kind of realization that we need to create more global governance models if we're going to train some of these things for global public good. And then there needs to be national level kind of stewardship and rulemaking essentially about how AI can be stewarded and used in the interaction with the agricultural kind of policies that already exist. And then someone mentioned in the chat, what about the farmer organization or other kinds of grouping levels? And I think we're going to end up having governance at all of those levels. I think groups need the tools to be able to steward and restrict access or share access to their data. And then nationally and even subnationally, there's going to be differentiation. And then we probably also need some global tools and global guiding principles and governance mechanisms. So that's all emergent, but I think people are very awake to the need for that. And now we're trying to think about with the kinds of governance we've used in the past and with the way that these assets look, what's the best fit, or do we need to invent something new? So we'll just share that.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the points in the Q&A is also, do we see a danger of proprietary advisory software for smallholders? And that this would be therefore restricted and not a public good, as you're saying. Yeah, I'm seeing a bunch of heads nodding. Any other of our speakers interested in commenting on policy needs, especially, for example, in Vietnam and Brazil and Peru, where you've been working? You know, what kinds of policies would support the kinds of changes that we're talking about? Yeah, Katie.
Thanks. Yeah, one of the actions that we've seen in Vietnam is the interest to aggregate farmers, because many of the costs that are occurring are happening because of the fact that there are so many small farmers. So transaction costs are really high. And so to aggregate farmers that are similar to each other so that tailored advice can be provided to them, and also so that, you know, assistance and services can be provided to them is something that we're seeing can be promising, and that also that the software that we're developing can help to create layers of that aggregation. So that's one area that we're seeing some momentum around. I think it's also specifically important for the Vietnam context because it is typically a very top-down governance style. But if farmers can be aggregated, then we also can look at more of a landscape scale for agroecology, which can be difficult to promote agroecology at really, really small scales of non-subsistence farmers. So farmers that are doing commercial agriculture, but on a really small scale. Is it really necessary that they also have trees within their specific plot if it's very, very small, or if we can look at things on a larger landscape scale in these kind of communities? Is that something that can be incorporated into agroecological metrics? So yeah, those are just some things that we're experiencing from Vietnam.
Thank you. Very practical points about policy for extension. Anybody else? Peru, Brazil. No, we have.
There are two people with their hands up in the attendees list. I don't know if you can, if they want to say anything. 3 people.
Yeah, thank you. Let's let Violaine go, and then we'll go to our audience.
Thank you. Yeah, very quickly, an example in Brazil from policy. So we have developed a curriculum, a training curriculum focused on agroecological practices for livestock. And one thing that we are exploring with our partners in the state of Pará would be to have an adoption at state level of this curriculum so as to guide technical assistance, and then use Solis or other digital tools as the dissemination hub for this. And I am mentioning this example because this is our intention for livestock, but this is something that already happened in the case of cocoa, where the state adopted the training curriculum developed by the global cocoa platform as a public policy for technical assistance to cocoa farmers. So I think that can be a practical example of how to scale agroecology.
Thank you, Violaine. And I'd like to invite Laban Wafula to speak. And one of our facilitators will have to unmute the speaker, please. Yeah, and then Laban, you'll have to unmute yourself. You should be able to unmute yourself now. And we'll go in a second. Laban, while you're working that out, Lizzie Igbine? Could the facilitators unmute? Yeah, and then Lizzie, please.
Thank
go
you
ahead.
very much. Thank you very much. I am Lizzie. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Am I
Thank you.
audible? Yes, okay. I'm Lizzie Igbine from Nigerian Women Agro-Allied Farmers Association. And in our farms, we already have agroecology in existence. Because in the farms, we have our crops, our animal, our vegetables. The environment is agroecology. But there are basic things that the policy should bring in place. One, we have been having this issue of warehousing. When we harvest, we lose a lot because the farmers don't have a particular place to keep their produce. So these produce are eaten by animals, stolen away, spoiled along the way. So we need to conserve more of our production. Two, the farmers need markets. Closeness of market to the farms makes it possible for the farmers to get back cash from their production. But you can see that because of the locations of the markets, farmers go a long way, losing along the line, missing out what they should have earned more. And that always brings us to square one. You produce, and at the end of the day, you are poor. Then finally, we are now saying that enough of programs. Programs without empowerment is wasting of the farmers' time. Every time the farmers will be invited to meetings where they will be given peanuts. Did you give them input? Did you listen to them and give them exactly what they need? Do you support them with technology? Do you give them a training? Than holding a workshops and discussing government media? No. It's getting out of hand, especially in Africa. We need practical people in the farm to also have their own farms and support what is ongoing. We are tired of programs, workshops without training, without empowerment, and without any support to farmers. This is my own contribution. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Lizzie. A really sobering reminder of the need to be ground relevant and to work with farmers and walk the talk, not just talk the talk. I think also Lizzie is reflecting a number of the comments that we're getting in both the chat and the Q&A, that people really want solutions for their local problems. And this is a challenge with digital tools that are intended to support scaling at very large levels where it's hard to capture those contexts. So let's move now to Laban. Please keep your intervention quite short. We have two other people who'd like to speak, so brief responses are welcome. Please go ahead, Laban. And for the facilitators, if you could unmute the next two speakers. Thank you. Laban, are you able to unmute yourself? Okay, I think we'll go to Caleb Mbayaki next, please.
Greetings, team. I am happy for the indulgence. My name is Caleb Mbayaki. I'm from Kenya. I'm an agroecologist with a local organization. Now, I have maybe two sentiments in place I can be able to maybe give in. In Kenya, we have policies that are in place, but however, most of the policies we operate in a system where policies are made. Now, when they come to implementation, it becomes the hard thing, because now, in terms of agroecology, there is a big difference when you are using the conventional technologies vis-a-vis the ancient technologies, because now with the world and there's a big space in terms of regenerative agriculture, agroecology is being driven to the bigger end. Now, one of the worst things is that how when we mix agroecology and the issue of GMO, now that becomes the hardest things to crack. So it gives us a very hard time to move and talk to the smallholder farmers in that perspective. Secondly, is that the scale of adoption at agroecological practices within farm has been ancient. Most of things have been using the basic scales of agroecology. However, the biggest or the hardest hurdle is in terms of aggregation, in terms of market access, and now the product development perspective. Now, how the product development perspectives comes in place, that's where the gap has to be actually filled. Apparently now most of the production we are moving towards organic production, which is a part of agroecological practices because there's minimal disturbance of soils in terms of the microbes. So we are looking at organic matter, organic inputs, organic production now, and that forms a basis of regenerative agricultural technologies. Now, how we come up with these and now formulate into a policy becomes a hurdle. Recently, there was in Kenya, they passed a policy that is known as the Seed Act of 2024. We want to maintain the F1 seed types. Those are part of the agroecological things. Now, considering it's a region that we are suffering the issue of climate change, in terms of climate change, we have the inundating temperatures, dwindling rainfall in areas where...
Caleb, I'm sorry, do you mind wrapping up? I'd like to give the floor to...
Okay. I think that is it, but general scope, we have a lot of things to give in place.
Thank you. So reminding us again of the need for these locally relevant solutions, but also bringing together the problems of the farmer with the policies that need to be developed. I want to just acknowledge a few of the really important points that have come up in the Q&A. One of which is, given that the digital technology world in agriculture has really focused on precision agriculture types of solutions, and agroecological practices are an alternative to that are not often integrated into digital tools, how can we better make available the kinds of agroecological metrics and practices? And for example, doing that through open source code. I think that's an extremely important point that we could come back to, but I think developing open source code would be the action point for our pathways forward in the next 5 years. There was also a suggestion of how to develop better trust between digital developers and farmers, and the proposal was made to have a hackathon bringing together the two groups. And so that would be another methodology or approach in the next few years to experiment with to bring these communities better together. There's also the question of digital tools are often siloed and focusing on specific tasks, which is appropriate for local solutions, but difficult when you deal with scaling. And so the point is, how can agroecology, how can digital tools better reflect the integrated and holistic metrics and approaches from multiple sites? And we have this tension between how agroecology can, digital tools for agroecology can best meet local needs versus be generalizable. Okay. I think we are at time. I really want to thank everybody. Apologies for the people who weren't able to speak. It was a fantastic set of presentations, and we have a number of points that we'll put together into a blog to share with you. I'd like to turn over now to Christophe Larose from INPAD, from the European Commission, to provide our closing.
Thank you, Lini, and thank you everybody for your participation and certainly your contribution to this discussion. Of course, I would like to express words of appreciation for the work that has been done under this specific intervention that is called Transitions, this program that we are supporting through also partnerships with IFAD. That is really to look at different dimensions of agroecology, and the digital dimension was one important component of this program. So in the interest of time, I will be very short. What I would like simply to say is that I particularly appreciated how these different digital tools that we have been supporting through the program, so the work around Solis and in rice in Vietnam. I think what I appreciate is that there was a reflection, of course, from the start or in the development on how the agroecological principles are contributing to the development of its apps. So we have two different approaches, but at least there was a kind of analysis on how agroecological principles are connecting to these tools, which I appreciate. What is also very interesting, I think, is to remind everybody that any digital app is certainly part of a social innovation approach. The tool is the tool, but the tool without what makes the tool useful is nothing. So what you presented, Violaine, is very explicit on that, and at the same time also that we are not building new tools out of nothing. It can grow from existing ones, and you can improve them, and you can develop them over time, which is also, I think, an illustration of what you made, Solène. Of course, digital solutions and agroecology can go together, but I think we have several interventions that are also showing the tensions, of course, between the two. So we shouldn't underestimate the potential of digital solutions for the scaling of agroecology, but of course it creates specific tensions, issues that we need to look at, and I think Oliver Roos in particular raised quite a number of them that needs really to be looked at. And my last point is also to listen to the farmers. I think what Mrs. Lizzie Igbine said is true. It's true for many things. It's true in the way research is trying to work with farmers. It's true in the way that developers of specific tools are trying to work with farmers. We need to have this, very, let's say from the start, this attention to the context, and really to look at what are the needs of the actors that we really want to support in their development. It's always there, but we at times forget or don't pay sufficient attention to that. So just as a reminder for all of us that if we want to contribute to change, if we want to contribute to the scaling of agroecological transformations of agriculture and food systems, we certainly need to listen much more to the core actors, and the core actors are certainly the farmers. And just to also to invite you to look at recent documentation that has been produced by the European Commission. There is a document that is called Strategic Dialogue on the EU Agriculture Future, and it comes with quite interesting proposals that may impact on the developments of the future agricultural policy in the EU. And there are quite significant proposals to work on benchmarking, on sustainability, farming systems in Europe and food systems in Europe, that I hope will be able to use part of the work that we have facilitated through this program. So thank you very much. It was a very interesting, very dense program this afternoon, and very informative. So thank you.